to another Running on Air video. In this one I'm going to be going back to the D10 and looking at some of the sound distortion problems that I've been having. If you haven't seen the first part of this video, then it would make sense to go back and watch that first. But before I start, if you'd like to support the channel, you could check out some of my tracks which are available on Bandcamp and other streaming platforms, and I'll leave links to those in the description. So enough of that, let's get on with it. So in the first part of this D10 renovation, I concentrated mainly on cosmetic aspects and the basic functionality like switches and the keyboard itself. And after a couple of minor setbacks, I managed to get it to the point where it essentially worked. But one of the things that I noticed was that with some of the sounds I was getting some kind of corrupted noise, which basically sounded like some form of digital distortion. I want to look into that in this video and see if I can resolve the problem. But before I start that, let me just take you through a couple of the patches so you've got some kind of idea of what it is I'm talking about. First of all, let's start with one that works. Now with that you can hear that there really isn't anything wrong with that. It sounds perfectly fine. But if I move to some other patches, let's go through a couple of them. That one's fine. I think that one's okay as well. I'll skip ahead to some of the worst ones. There seem to be more in the B bank of patches. Let's just try. Again, that one's okay. I think that one definitely has a bit of distortion in it, which is quite interesting. Now, a lot of them actually have a sort of jittering sound, rather like a slapback echo type effect. But some of them are a lot more glitchy. Now, let me see if I can find the one. Yeah, the orchestra hit. So that one's got the sort of echo effect, but it's also got some digital artifacts as well. So overall, some of the sounds are kind of circuit bent and some are good. Obviously the idea of this was as a restoration project, so I'm not really looking to go into circuit bending the D10, but clearly it looks like it could be a candidate. So in the first part of the investigation, I'm going to confirm if there's a problem with the way the sounds are being produced, and I'm going to do that by entering into the test mode. So I'm just going to turn the synth off. And then I've got to hold the exit and edit buttons and turn it on again. And then you can see on the display it comes up with select mode and you can choose which test to run. This is good for a whole load of tests, and you can find more information about that in the service manual, which is freely available. Just do a Google search. If I remember, I'll stick a link in the description. So for the PCM wave test, it's exit plus compare. So exit and compare, and then I've selecting 1 to 8 on the panels and then just checking the playback quality. So let's go through those. Most of those seem to have a bit of a playback issue. There's the distortion, we've got the echo problem. It's tricky to tell though with number 4 because it's noise. There could be some artifacts in there, but I wouldn't know because, well, it's noise. But 8 seems to be okay, but there's clearly a problem on the majority of those waveforms. So I think the next step then is to look again in the service manual and look for the circuit diagram and the PCB layout, and then look for problems there. Okay, so I've got the service manual open in front of me, and I'm just going to start off by looking at the block diagram. And this is the test that we just completed. Now it's split into 2 sections, so buttons 1 to 4 correspond to IC27 and IC25. Now it's only really talking about whether the sound is produced or not, so it's kind of like a test for complete death, I think. Then we've got the second section, which is button 5 to 8, and that relates to IC25 again and IC26. So we need to look at IC25, 26 and 27. I've now gone over to the block diagram in another part of the manual, and here I'm zooming in to IC25, 26 and 27. So we've got 2 PCM ROMs, which is where the sounds are actually stored, and then we have this synth engine here. So given the tests that we've conducted so far, it is possible to get a decent sound out of the synth. So the D to A converter is unlikely to be the problem. It is going to be in the areas of 25, 26 and 27. I think it's notable that the first 3 sounds on the test were all damaged or distorted in some way, but the 4th one and the 8th one, i.e. relating to the last sound in each one of those tests, sounded okay. Now bearing in mind one of them was noise, so it's difficult to know exactly whether that one's okay. But I'm just wondering if that implies that the issue is more to do with IC25 or some sort of common factor between IC25 and the others. Now if there is a fault in this chip itself, then it's game over. But that strikes me as unlikely, as it is able to produce decent sound, so it could be a common communications link between the chips. Okay, so this is interesting then. We go down, have a little bit more detail and see how it works. So we've got the data lines are here, 0 to 7, so it's only 8-bit, and then we've got the addressing here. So the links are going to be the same. It's going to be the same piece of copper which will come from the synth engine, which will go over to pin 18 on both PCM chips. And the way in which the synth engine accesses one chip or the other is this line here, which comes down here and will either enable one of the chips or the other one. That's why there's a NOT gate there. This might explain why we have this mirroring of symptoms between one PCM ROM and the other one. Could be, anyway. Yeah, because basically they're using exactly the same lines. They're using exactly the same addressing, and they're using exactly the same data lines. Anything else interesting here? So the output is here by the looks of things, and that goes over to the D to A converter, which at the moment I don't suspect of having any issues. It's interesting. Okay, so the next thing really is to get the synth apart and have a really good look. Right, so I've got the lid off again. These are the chips in question. And what we need to do is make sure that the connectivity between here and these is okay. Now my impression is that that doesn't look too bad. I can't see any obvious issues, but I'm obviously going to have to look a lot closer, and we've got to look at the other side of the board as well. Okay, so looking at the other side of the board, that dark section that I'm looking at now is actually the underneath of the synth engine. So yeah, that doesn't look so good, does it really? Now PCM ROMs, there is perhaps a couple of issues on some of those tracks, so that's worth looking into. The board looks bad, but as we've already found out, it is mainly working, and there's another section over here which is particularly bad. Okay, so I've started a bit of investigation on the board. I've checked out all the addressing and data between the PCM ROMs and the synth engine. And I've not found any problems so far. So I'm going to have to start looking somewhere else, because we're looking at in the area of digital distortion, at least at this point. I think my attention will probably come over at the D2A converter. So we could certainly have a look at the connectivity between the D2A converter and the synth engine. That's worth looking at. Okay, so the plan is to keep poking around. I'm looking for broken tracks. It's the most obvious thing considering the condition of the board. Beyond that, if we start having to look at damaged chips, that's going to be a bit more tricky. Now, reading some fault-finding posts online, one of the things that people did mention is quite often the DAC goes, and that would produce the sort of symptoms that I'm seeing. So fortunately, it's still possible to get these. So I've ordered one, and I'll try a replacement and see if that helps. So in the meantime, it's a bit of an experiment. It just so happens that I also have a D20, which, as you can see, I've opened up. Main difference is you've got two extra connectors here. There's an extra board on the D20, which, let's have a look. It's down there. The D10 doesn't have that. So what I can do then is to swap the EEPROMs out with the D10 and then see what happens. Okay, so I've changed the chip over and I've just tested using the headphones, and the good news is that it's not any worse than it was, but it certainly hasn't fixed the problem. I think we're back with the ROM chip and the synth chip for any possible solutions on this. Changing the synth chip, it's surface mount, it's a large chip, and I don't know whether I feel confident enough trying to get it off and then get a new one back on. It's going to be tricky, but I suppose it's worth considering. So I'm going to give that some thought and then come back to it. I've also got this D20. Now when I tested this the other day, it booted to a point and then locked up. And I thought, well, maybe what I could do is to take the processor out and put it back in. I know that one of the problems that this D series has had is that a bit of corrosion occurs on the processor pins and then they stop working. So I wondered whether that was perhaps the issue. So I took it out and I put it back in, and it's working now. And it's got all the same sort of faults that the original D10 had. The board is pretty much the same. but I will need to move a couple of components around. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the board out of this D20 and put it in the D10 and see if I end up with a working system, because I think that would be a nice simple solution. And then at least I've got one that works, and this one, which is a bit of a mess, plus it's got some nasty marks on the case. I think I'm just going to scrap this, just part it out, and that will be fine. I don't mind doing that. Okay, so I've got both boards in front of me. I'll just show you what I need to move. So on the D10 we've got these 3 white connectors, but they're not on the D20. We've got an extra connector here on the D20. We don't need that, but I don't need to remove it either because it can just stay disconnected. I need to change the firmware over. There's the D20 firmware, and here is the D10, so that's relatively simple. And apart from that, oh yeah, there's another connector up here which needs to move. Overall, I would say this board is in much better condition anyway. So even if I managed to get the D10 board working, I wonder how long it would actually stay working. Whereas this doesn't seem to have much in the way of corrosion. Let me just turn it over, have a quick look. So if you look at this one, it's just much better overall. There's no dark patches. I suppose there's a little bit of corrosion, but overall it's much better than the D10 board. Putting this back into the D10, and I've suddenly realized that it's not just the connectors that come across. There's actually a whole bunch of chips and resistors and capacitors probably, and they're all over here. I'll have to move those as well, and also up here as well. There's another chip missing and a few other components. So, yeah. Okay, so enough of the speeded up soldering. Suffice it to say that I had to do quite a lot of that, and there were a number of things I missed. I had to go back and open up the case a couple of times to fix things that I had missed. First of all, there's an extra connector on the back of the D20, so I had to move that. And the other thing was that when I did get the sound to work, I hadn't transferred a link across on the board, and therefore none of the LEDs worked on the front panel. And I'd completely assembled the unit, so I had to take it all apart again. But overall it wasn't such a big deal, and it does seem to be working fine now. Now I can't say I've tested absolutely every single function, but in terms of what I wanted, which was a programmable synth that I could use and experiment with, I think we're at that stage. If there is something I've missed, then I may well go back and try and fix that, but I don't think I'll be doing any more videos on it. I think I'd rather go ahead and do a demo of the stock sounds, and also look at the programming, the various options apart from the front panel. But anyway, before I go ahead with that, let's have a look at what's changed. So I'm going to go through some of the sounds that I did before. So first of all, it was the 12, I think. And I think it really started to distort when I got down to the lower end. That sounds fine to me, although I've had some problems with the sound recording on this, which has been a bit of a nightmare compared to my usual videos. So that's fine. Let's go over to the orchestral hit, which I think, was it 51? No, 71? Yeah. Well, as you can hear, it plays back perfectly, but in some ways it's not as interesting as it was before, so that's a bit of a shame, but you can't have everything. I do wonder if it's possible to actually use this in a modern setting. Maybe. I'll give it some thought. Okay, so that's that. Let's go and do the PCM test as well, if I can remember how to do it. I think it was exit and edit. Turn it on. Select mode. Sounds pretty good. So with the noise, I can't really tell whether there's any difference between that and the way it was before, but the other three certainly are fine. Oh, it was a piano, yeah. Number 8 was the only one that was good. One final thought on this, because I never really got to the root of the problem, and I was suspecting the synth engine, but while I've been editing, I've been thinking about some of the symptoms, and while it's true that sound 4 relating to PCM 1 was probably good, and sound 8 relating to PCM 2 was probably good, there was a significant difference in the way the sounds were damaged, as it were. So, just going from memory, the first 3 were very echoey, giving that slapback effect, whereas 5, 6 and 7, i.e. the first 3 of PCM 2, were very distorted and glitchy. Now those two problems are distinctly different, and that perhaps suggests that the PCM chips were damaged. At this stage I'll never know. Unfortunately, the mystery of what was actually wrong with the board has not been solved, which I think is a bit of a disappointment from my point of view. Hopefully some of the fault finding process may be of use to some of you which are starting to get into this sort of thing. So the D10 isn't really considered to be anything special in terms of 80s synthesizers, and I think that is probably the case, but it does sound pretty nice and it's worth exploring a bit more, and it's incredibly cheap. It was in my cheap synthesizers video, for example. So what I'm going to do is I'll do a video showcasing a selection of the factory sounds that I particularly like, and I'm going to look at editing software as well, so possibly a couple of videos there. And I think also I'd like to do a new track which is based mainly on D10 sounds, and maybe a few extra things thrown in there, but there are drum sounds on here, so it should be possible to put something together which is purely D10. So I'll give that a go, and I think that's about it really. So if you got this far, thanks very much for watching. Hope it's been worthwhile, and hopefully catch you on the next one. So thanks very much. Bye.